In a small, cozy diner tucked away in the heart of a quiet town, life unfolded at its own unhurried pace. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, or at least pretended to. It was one of those spots where locals came for coffee and gossip. Travelers stopped by for a quick bite, and teenagers hung out after school just to escape their parents' watchful eyes. And in this little world, there was her, the waitress who kept it all running smoothly. She wasn't flashy or loud. She didn't wear expensive clothes or carry herself with an air of confidence that demanded attention. Instead, she moved quietly between tables, balancing plates and cups like a pro. Her smile was warm, almost too warm for some people's liking, as if she genuinely cared about whether your burger was cooked just right, or if you wanted more syrup with your pancakes. But not everyone appreciated her efforts. Some saw her kindness as weakness, mistaking her calm demeanor for someone who wouldn't stand up for herself. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. Every day brought new faces to the diner, along with familiar ones. There were regulars who tipped well and treated her kindly, but then there were others, those who acted like they owned the place simply because they walked in wearing fancy shoes or flashing expensive watches. These were the type who made snide comments under their breath when she refilled their coffee too slowly or accidentally spilled a drop of water on the table. She'd heard it all before. Why is she even working here? Doesn't she have bigger dreams? Look at her uniform. It looks like it's from last century. But she never let it show. Not once did she roll her eyes, snap back, or even flinch when someone mocked her. Maybe it was because she had grown used to it over the years. Or maybe it was because deep down, she knew something they didn't. While they judged her based on what they could see, a tired waitress in a worn-out uniform, she carried a secret inside her chest, something so powerful it could silence every critic in the room. Only no one knew about it, not yet. When she clocked out at the end of her shift, she wasn't just going home to rest. She spent hours practicing, pouring her heart into something most people would never expect from someone like her. Music was her escape, her passion, her way of speaking without words. But she kept it hidden, tucking it away like a precious gem nobody else could touch. To the outside world, she was just another face in the crowd, another person trying to make ends meet. Little did they know, she was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself, and when that moment came, it would change everything. The diner was busier than usual that evening, buzzing with chatter and clinking dishes. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling fries, a comforting aroma that usually made people feel at ease. But tonight, there was an edge to the atmosphere, something restless, almost electric. Maybe it was the cold wind rattling, the windows, or the fact that the small space was packed tighter than ever before. Whatever it was, it set the stage for what was about to unfold. She moved through the crowd like she always did, weaving between tables with practiced ease. Her arms were loaded with plates, her notepad tucked into the pocket of her apron, and her smile still intact, despite the chaos around her. Most customers treated her kindly enough, a nod here, a polite "thank you" there. But then there were them. 3 men in sharp suits who looked completely out of place among the faded booths and cracked vinyl seats. They had walked in earlier, laughing loudly as if they owned the room, and immediately claimed a table near the center. It didn't take long for their behavior to catch everyone's attention. They weren't just loud, they were obnoxious, making jokes about everything from the menu prices to the cracked tiles on the floor. And when she approached their table to take their order, they turned their focus squarely on her. One of them smirked as he glanced at her uniform, pulling at an imaginary thread on his sleeve. "Looks like this place hasn't upgraded its staff in years," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. His friends burst into laughter, slapping the table like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. She froze for a split second, but only a split second. Then she did what she always did, smiled politely, and asked if they'd like anything to drink. Another jab came quickly. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" one of them teased, mimicking her soft voice in a mocking tone. The third joined, in, pretending to stumble over his words like hers. Their laughter echoed through the diner, drawing glances from other customers. Some looked uncomfortable, others annoyed, but no one said a word. The rest of the patrons exchanged uneasy looks, shifting in their seats as the trio continued their performance. A few muttered under their breath, calling them rude or classless, but no one dared confront them. After all, these men carried themselves with a certain arrogance, the kind that screamed confidence, and maybe even entitlement. It was clear they thought they were untouchable, above reproach, and certainly above someone like her, but she didn't flinch. She kept her composure, jotting down their orders without missing a beat. If anything, her smile grew warmer, almost defiant in its sincerity. It was as if she knew something they didn't, that their words couldn't touch her, no matter how sharp they tried to be. Still, the tension in the room thickened with every passing minute. Everyone could feel it, hanging heavy in the air like storm clouds waiting to break. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the manager stepped up to the mic near the corner of the diner. He announced that the scheduled musician for the night had cancelled last minute, leaving the crowd without entertainment. In a desperate attempt to salvage the evening, he offered a free meal to anyone willing to step up and sing. The room fell, silent for a moment, followed by scattered chuckles and murmurs. No one volunteered. That is, until she raised her hand, her quiet determination cutting through the noise like a knife. The moment she raised her hand, the room seemed to freeze. Conversations halted, forks paused midway to mouths, and all eyes are turned toward her. Even the diner's usual clatter, the hiss of the coffee machine, the clink of glasses, felt quieter somehow, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not even the manager, who had made the announcement, could hide his surprise. He blinked once, then twice, before finally nodding and motioning for her to come forward. At first, whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is she serious?" someone muttered under their breath. A teenager at a nearby table nudged her friend, stifling a giggle. And then there were them, the three men in suits who had spent the evening mocking her every move. They weren't just whispering. They were full-on laughing now, their voices cutting through the silence like knives. One of them leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. His friends joined in, slapping the table and doubling over with amusement. It was clear they thought this was another chance to make fun of her, another moment where she'd stumble and embarrass herself. But she didn't seem fazed. If anything, she looked calmer than ever. She set down her notepad on an empty table, smoothed out her apron, and walked steadily toward the small stage tucked into the corner of the diner. The manager handed her the microphone with a hesitant smile, as if he wasn't sure what to expect either. She took it without hesitation, her fingers brushing against the cool metal surface. Then she stood there for a moment, quiet and composed, scanning the room with a gaze so steady it almost felt like she was daring anyone to doubt her. The murmurs grew louder, more impatient. People shifted in their seats, some craning their necks to get a better view, others exchanging skeptical glances. The tension in the air was palpable, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. No one knew what to expect. Was she really going to sing? Or was this some kind of joke? The businessmen were still chuckling, clearly convinced they were about to witness something hilariously bad. But as she adjusted the mic stand and closed her eyes for a brief second, something shifted. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was soft but steady. "This song means a lot to me," she said simply, her words carrying just enough weight to silence the last few stragglers still whispering. There was no grand introduction, no attempt to explain herself or win anyone over. Just those few honest words, delivered with a sincerity that caught people off guard. Someone in the back let out a low whistle, half jokingly, but it quickly died away as she exhaled deeply and began. For the first few notes, you could barely hear her. Her voice started soft, almost hesitant, like she was testing the waters. But then something incredible happened. It grew stronger, richer, filling the tiny diner with a sound so pure it felt otherworldly. The kind of voice that makes your chest tighten and your throat ache because it's too beautiful to ignore. By the time she hit the chorus, the entire room had gone completely silent. Every single person was staring at her, wide-eyed and slack-jawed, unable to believe what they were hearing. And the three men in suits? Their laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by expressions of shock and maybe even shame. The diner felt like it had been hit by a sudden storm. Not the kind that shakes walls or rattles windows, but the kind that stops you in your tracks and makes you forget how to breathe. Her voice filled every corner of the room, wrapping around, people like a warm blanket on a cold night. It wasn't just the notes she sang. It was the way she poured herself into them, as if each word carried a piece of her soul. You could hear the years of quiet resilience in her tone, the unspoken battles she'd fought, and the dreams she'd kept tucked away where no one could see. At first, some people didn't know what to do. A couple near the counter exchanged bewildered glances, their forks hovering above half-eaten plates of pie. An older man at the bar wiped his glasses unnecessarily, not because they were dirty, but because he needed something to do with his hands. Even the cook poked his head out from the kitchen, spatula still in hand, his jaw dropping as he realized the source of the sound echoing through the diner. But then, slowly, the room began to transform. Heads turned toward the stage, eyes wide, with disbelief. Strangers leaned forward in their seats, elbows resting on tables, completely absorbed. Someone whispered, "Wow," under their breath, breaking the spell for just a moment before everyone fell silent again. The song she chose, Hallelujah, was hauntingly beautiful, its melody both simple and profound. And when paired with her voice, it became something else entirely, a force that demanded attention, respect, and maybe even tears. And tears came. A young mother sitting with her two kids dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, trying to hide the fact that she was crying. Across the room, an elderly woman gripped her husband's hand tightly, mouthing the lyrics silently, as if she'd heard this song 100 times, but never quite like this. Even the rowdy group of teenagers in the corner stopped scrolling through, their phones, their faces softening as they watched her sing. For those few minutes, nothing else mattered. The noise outside, the bills waiting to be paid, the petty arguments over spilled coffee, all of it faded into the background. But perhaps the most striking reaction came from the three men in suits. Their laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by expressions of shock so raw they looked like they'd been caught doing something wrong. One of them sat perfectly still, his hands frozen around the glass of water he'd been about to drink. Another stared at her, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't process what was happening. The third, the one who had mocked her voice earlier, looked down at the table, his cheeks flushed red. They weren't just embarrassed, they were humbled, forced to confront the reality that they had misjudged her in the worst possible way. By the time she reached the final verse, the entire diner seemed suspended in time. Every note hung in the air like a thread pulling people closer together. When the last chord finally faded, there was a beat of silence, a single fragile moment where no one moved or spoke. Then, as if waking from a dream, the room erupted into applause. It started small, tentative almost, but quickly grew louder and more urgent. People clapped wildly, stomping their feet and cheering as if they'd just witnessed something life-changing, because, in a way, they had. She stood there on the little stage, the microphone still in her hand, looking almost surprised by the reaction. Her face softened into a shy smile, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to take it. All in, the cheers, the standing ovation, the tears streaming down strangers' faces. In that moment, she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone unforgettable, someone who reminded everyone in the room that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The applause didn't stop right away. It swelled and echoed through the diner, growing louder with each passing second. People were on their feet now, clapping so hard their palms turned red. Some whistled, others cheered, and a few even wiped away tears they hadn't expected to shed. The energy in the room was electric, charged with a mix of awe and disbelief. For many, it felt like they'd stumbled into something magical, something that didn't happen every day, but would stay etched in their memories forever. She stood there for a moment, gripping the microphone tightly, her knuckles white against its smooth surface, her cheeks flushed pink, not from embarrassment this time, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. She scanned the room slowly, taking in the sea of faces looking back at her. There were strangers smiling at her, nodding as if to say, "You did it." There were regulars who had seen her serving coffee for years, now beaming with pride, as though she were their own. And then there were the three men in suits, still sitting stiffly at their table, their earlier mockery replaced by something far more complicated: regret. One of them finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at his friends as if seeking permission or courage. Then, clearing his throat, he began to clap. At first, it was awkward and uneven, almost hesitant. But soon, he picked up the rhythm, joining in with everyone else. His two companions followed suit, standing reluctantly and adding their applause to the chorus. The sound wasn't perfect, it lacked the enthusiasm of the others, but it was enough to signal a shift. They weren't cheering because they wanted to. They were cheering because they had to. Because deep down, they knew they owed it to her. As the applause began to die down, a middle-aged man near the counter stepped forward. He introduced himself as a local musician who played gigs around town. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" She smiled softly, explaining that she'd been singing since she was a child, though mostly alone or in places where no one could hear. "I guess I never thought anyone would care enough to listen," she admitted, her words tinged with both humility and honesty. The crowd murmured approvingly, some nodding in understanding, while others exchanged knowing looks. Everyone understood now why she carried herself the way she did, with quiet dignity and grace. More people approached her after that, each wanting to share a piece of their reaction. A young couple told her how her performance reminded them of why they loved live music. An older woman thanked her, saying her voice brought back memories of concerts she'd attended decades ago. Even the teenagers in the corner, who had seemed glued to their phones earlier, came over to shake her hand and tell her she was amazing. Each interaction felt personal, real, as if she had connected with every single person in the room on some deeper level. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when one of the suited men walked up to her. His face was pale, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, as if he didn't know what to do with them. "Look," he started, his voice shaky and unsure. "We were out of line before. What we said, it was wrong. I'm sorry." His words hung in the air for a moment, raw and unpolished. He glanced at his friends, who nodded in agreement, then back at her, waiting for a response. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without missing a beat, she extended her hand. "Apology accepted," she said simply, her tone calm but firm. It wasn't forgiveness laced with bitterness or delivered with a smirk. It was sincere, almost disarming in its kindness. The man shook her hand, relief washing over his face, while his friends followed suit, offering their own apologies. In that exchange, something shifted, not just for them, but for everyone watching. It was a reminder that redemption is possible, even in the smallest of moments, and that grace has the power to change hearts. By the time the evening wound down, the diner buzzed with a different kind of energy. Conversations lingered longer than usual, laughter rang out more freely, and plates were cleared with smiles instead of sighs. She returned to her duties, refilling coffee cups and handing out checks, but everything felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of judgment and misunderstanding had lifted, leaving behind only connection and respect. Words spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, the diner was buzzing, not just with the usual breakfast crowd, but with people who had heard about what happened the night before. Some came to see if the stories were true, while others simply wanted to catch a glimpse of the woman who had silenced an entire room with her voice. The local radio station even called, asking for an interview. It wasn't long before her performance became the talk of the town, and then some. The manager of the diner, a gruff but kind-hearted man who had always treated her like family, couldn't stop smiling. "I've been telling you for years, you're too talented to be stuck here," he said one afternoon as he watched her refill coffee cups. She laughed it off, brushing away his words with the same humility she always carried. But deep down, something had shifted. That night at the mic hadn't just changed how others saw her. It had changed how she saw herself. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream bigger, to imagine a life where her voice wasn't confined to the walls of the diner or the solitude of her small apartment. The three men in suits returned a few days later. This time without their earlier arrogance. They apologized again, this time not just to her, but also to the manager and a few other staff members they'd dismissed during their previous visit. One of them admitted that her performance had stayed with him, replaying in his mind long after he left the diner. "It made me think about how quick we are to judge people," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "You reminded me that everyone has a story we don't know, and maybe shouldn't assume we do." Her newfound fame didn't come without challenges. A few regulars joked that she might get too big for the diner now, teasing her whenever she passed by their tables. She'd laugh along, assuring them she wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Truthfully, she loved the diner, the familiar faces, the comforting chaos, the way it felt like home even on the hardest days. Still, she began taking small steps toward pursuing her passion more seriously. Local venues started reaching out, inviting her to perform at open mic nights or charity events. At first she hesitated, worried about stepping too far out of her comfort zone, but encouragement poured in from unexpected places. Co-workers, regular customers, even strangers who had stumbled upon videos someone had recorded of her singing. One evening, after closing up the diner, she sat alone at a booth, staring at an invitation to sing at a nearby cafe. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper as she weighed her options. Could she really do this? What if people stopped clapping? What if the magic of that one night never happened again? Just as doubt began, creeping in, the door creaked open. It was the cook, back to grab something he'd forgotten. He paused when he saw her, then walked over and slid into the seat across from her. "You scared?" he asked bluntly, his arms crossed over his chest. She nodded, laughing nervously. "Good," he replied with a grin. "That means you care. But let me tell you something. If anyone deserves to chase their dreams, it's you. Don't let fear rob you of that." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. The next day, she accepted the invitation. When she stepped onto the stage at the cafe, nerves prickled her skin. But the moment she opened her mouth to sing, everything else melted away. The audience responded just as they had in the diner, applauding, cheering, moved to tears. And with each performance, her confidence grew. She realized that her voice wasn't just a gift for herself. It was a way to connect with others, to remind them of beauty and resilience and the power of second chances. Though opportunities began opening up, she kept working at the diner, balancing late-night gigs with early morning shifts. Some might have seen it as holding herself back, but she knew better. The diner was part of who she was, a foundation that had supported her through thick and thin. Plus, there was something special about watching people react to her music in a place where they least expected it. Whether it was a tired truck driver, tapping his foot, or a stressed-out mum, humming along with her kids, those moments reminded her why she sang in the first place. Not for fame or applause, but to touch hearts. Life began to change in ways she never could have predicted. The small gigs at local cafes turned into bigger opportunities. Invitations to perform at community festivals, charity events, and even a spot on a regional morning show. Each performance brought new faces, new stories, and new chances to share her gift with the world. People would approach her after shows, telling her how her music had touched them, helped them through tough times, or simply reminded them of the beauty in everyday moments. She listened to every word, humbled by the realization that her voice had become more than just sound. It was a bridge connecting her to others. But despite the growing recognition, she stayed grounded. The diner remained her anchor, a place where she could still be herself without the pressure of expectations. Some mornings, she'd arrive before sunrise, tying on her apron and diving into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, pouring coffee, and chatting with regulars. To them, she wasn't the singer or the star. She was still the same person who remembered their favorite meals and greeted them with a smile no matter how busy things got. And they loved her for it. In fact, many of her loyal customers started showing up at her performances, cheering her on like proud family members. The three men in suits became some of her most unexpected supporters. They showed up at nearly every show, sitting quietly in the back and clapping louder than anyone else. One of them joked that he'd never miss a chance to hear her sing, not after what happened that night in the diner. Another admitted that hearing her perform had changed something inside him, making him think twice about judging others based on appearances. "You taught us a lesson we didn't know we needed," he said one evening, shaking his head in amazement. She smiled, grateful not just for their support, but for the sincerity behind it. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't just about letting go of anger. It was also about opening doors to understanding, connection, and growth. As her audience grew, so did her confidence. She started writing her own songs, drawing inspiration from the people and experiences that shaped her life. There was a song about the kindness of strangers, another about the quiet strength of working hard day after day, and yet another about finding beauty in unexpected places. Her lyrics resonated deeply because they came from a place of authenticity, from years spent observing human nature and cherishing the little things most people overlooked. When she sang these songs, it felt less like performing and more like sharing pieces of her soul with the world. Still, fame didn't come without its challenges. Some nights, she found herself missing the simplicity of her old life, the days when no one knew her name, and success wasn't measured by applause or social media followers. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering questions, like, what if I'm not good enough? Or what if this is all just luck? But then she'd remember the faces of those who believed in her, the cook who encouraged her to take risks, the manager who always cheered her on, and the countless strangers whose lives she'd touched through her music. Their belief became her strength, pushing her forward even when fear tried to pull her back. Years later, when she looked back on her journey, she realized it wasn't the big stages or glowing reviews that mattered most. It was the connections she made along the way, the friendships forged over shared meals in the diner, the lessons learned from both triumphs and mistakes, and the reminder that everyone has hidden depths worth discovering. That night in the diner hadn't just changed her life. It had changed the lives of everyone who witnessed it, teaching them to look beyond surface-level judgments and see the extraordinary potential in ordinary people. In the end, her story wasn't just about a waitress turned singer. It was about resilience, humility, and the power of staying true to yourself, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. And as she stood on stage one final time in the same diner where it all began, surrounded by friends, family, and fans, she couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't the ones we chase, they're the ones that find us when we least expect them.